For those of you that don't know, I'm James Peill. I'm not the Knight of Glin. He's up next. And I work for Christie's in New York. I moved to New York 2.5 years ago and joined Christie's back in 1994. And Desmond and I actually met in 1993, was when I was an intern working at Christie's. And the following summer, I went on a camping tour of Ireland and went and visited Glin. So we've been friends for a long time. Today, we're going to look at some furniture and houses in Ireland and hopefully pictures of the people who actually had that furniture made. And I'm also going to give you some contemporary gossip. Everybody loves a bit of gossip, so I'm going to hopefully satisfy that thirst tonight. This is a portrait of Dean Swift, the great cleric. And his portrait is by celebrated Irish artist called Francis Bindon in this wonderful frame by John Houghton. John Houghton is the Irish equivalent of Thomas Chippendale. And this frame was carved in 1735 for Bindon's wonderful portrait. Swift was writing to a fellow dean in 1732, and this is what he wrote. I never yet saw in Ireland a spot of earth 2 feet wide that had not in it something to displease. I think I was once in your county, Tipperary, which, like the rest of the whole kingdom, a bare face of nature, without houses or plantations, filthy cabins, miserable, tattered, half-starved creatures, scarce in human shape. One insolent, ignorant, oppressive squire to be found in 20 miles riding, a parish church to be found only in a summer's day journey, in comparison of which an English farmer's barn is a cathedral. Well, rather derogatory remarks there. This little Japanese lac Bogote cabinet on stand actually belonged to Dean Swift, and he wrote a book in 1729 called Directions to Servants, and in it he speaks of small chests and trunks with lock and key wherein they keep the tea and sugar. So this could have well concealed some of his tea and sugar. This was also reputed to have belonged to him. It's a marquetry secretaire cabinet that is now in the Victoria and Albert Museum. And a very new discovery was made. This belongs to a group of 4 cabinets of very similar form, all with marquetry decoration. And Desmond and I were in the Art Institute of Chicago last year, and the curator there whisked open a drawer, and underneath was the signature of the maker, John Kirkoffer, which gives us a name, a maker for all of this group. And we've actually just published an article in the magazine Antiques, which came out a few weeks ago. So if you want to read more, then do buy the October issue of the magazine Antiques. This is one of a pair of pier glasses made by John Booker, a member of a well-known Dublin looking glass making family, carvers and gilders. This was supplied in 1743 to the 10th Viscount Gormanston for the saloon at Old Gormanston Castle. Old Gormanston Castle is long gone and was replaced by this house here. The mirror on the left would have been designed to have gone in a window pier, so it would have added extra light to the room. And the basket of flowers on the top, don't know if you can see just there, that's a typical Irish feature. And also the carving is very flat. Again, that's an Irish feature. His bill, which is dated 29th of October 1743, survives. And there are very, very few pieces of documented furniture. So it was very exciting when the present Lord Gormanston discovered this bill in a tranche of family papers. Moving on to another cleric. This is Archbishop Charles Cobb, probably the most powerful figure in the mid-18th century Irish Church. And this is his house, Newbridge House in County Dublin, which has recently been attributed to the architect James Gibbs. And in Newbridge was this wonderful marquetry table with a beautiful floral marquetry top, clearly part of the same group of furniture as the cabinet that we saw earlier. And there is the drawing room that was added to the house in the 1760s with this rococo ceiling. It was added by the Archbishop's daughter-in-law, Lady Elizabeth Cobb. And there she is. And here is her secretaire cabinet, which was supplied by Christopher Hearn in 1764 for Newbridge. In December of the same year, she made an entry in her account book. It cost her £11, 17 shillings and sixpence, and she wrote, "A bureau with glass doors." As you can see, it's slightly more than a bureau with glass doors. It's got this lovely Palladian pediment here, centered by an eagle. And it was probably made for her bedroom. It would have combined the use of a clothes chest, these drawers here, and then a dressing table. This pulls out and has a baize-lined slide. She could have written at it, and then in here she would have kept her books and documents, while the mirrored doors would have served as a pier mirror to have reflected the light in the room. Also at Newbridge is this pair of side tables which have the Chinese fretwork frieze here. A lot of furniture in England and Ireland was influenced by Chinese furniture in the 1760s, and it actually echoes the Greek key fret there on the plasterwork. There's two of these tables in the dining room, still at Newbridge. And this charming doll's house was made for the daughters of the house, Catherine and Eliza, around 1760. It has a range of drawers here, and then inside little rooms for arranging furniture. It's actually quite big. It's about the same height as me, so it's a rather large doll's house. Moving on to Castletown in County Kildare. This was the great Irish powerhouse of the 18th century, built by Speaker William Connolly. The design was by an Italian architect, Alessandro Galilei, and the interior, with its two-storey hall, is by Sir Edward Lovat Pearce, who was one of the great Irish architects of the 18th century. This is the lady of the house, Lady Louisa Connolly, painted by the Scottish artist Alan Ramsay. She was a daughter of the Duke of Richmond and Gordon and married Tom Connolly. The Countess of Shelburne, an English peeress, visited Castletown, and she commented that things had greatly improved under Lady Louisa's guidance. I'm just going to read to you from her description. The house is very magnificent, with wings. On the ground floor is a very fine, complete apartment consisting of a hall, an antechamber, furnished with pale green damask, and a drawing room furnished with a damask of 4 colours. On the other side of the antechamber is a print room on the palest paper I ever saw, and the prettiest of its kind. Beyond that, a bedchamber and dressing room. On the other side of the hall, on the front of the house, a very handsome dining room where we dined, and to the left a private room of Mr. Connolly's and some others we didn't go into. Lady Louisa is one of the most amiable and pleasing young women I ever saw. She showed us the whole house, of which the second story is as good as the first, where she has a very pretty dressing room fitted up in the French taste, hung with white damask, and the portraits tied with knots of purple and silver ribbons. In the attic story there are 15 or 16 very good lodging rooms, with small dressing rooms fitted to them. The house is full of fine cabinet work of inlaid wood made in London, and pieces of French and old china which give it great elegance. And here is Lady Louisa's writing cabinet and a detail of the interior. This is one of a group of 4 cabinets known to exist. They really are the Rolls-Royce of Irish furniture. The general form is again reflecting the age of Vitruvius Britannicus, with these pilasters here and the scrolled broken pediment centered by an urn. But then it breaks away into the Rococo with these lovely carved enrichments here, framing flamed figured mahogany. We sold one similar to this at Christie's back in 2000 for just over $300,000. This is one of a set of 24 dining chairs that would have been supplied to Lady Louisa and her husband, and one of 4 armchairs which they would have had probably for playing cards. They were great card players and gamblers. On the legs they're carved with little vine trails running all the way up, and you can see on here this is all vine leaves carved up and across the top rail, even on the stretcher and legs. And in the green drawing room there are a pair of oval pier glasses which have been attributed to Richard Cranfield, another great 18th century Dublin carver and gilder. Everything in furniture always harked back to Roman or classical influence, so these are based on the oval Roman medallion shape. In the red drawing room there's this pair of rectangular giltwood pier glasses, again supplied by Richard Cranfield. The other great Irish powerhouse of the 18th century was Carton in County Kildare. This was remodelled by Richard Castle for the 19th Earl of Kildare in 1739. His son and wife were married in 1747 and moved straight into Carton, but the house still wasn't finished. The son who moved in later became the first Duke of Leinster, and there he is, actually painted by an American artist, Gilbert Stuart. This portrait hangs in the Montclair Museum in New Jersey. His wife was actually the sister of Lady Louisa we saw earlier. They were both daughters of the Duke of Richmond, and they had a very prolific correspondence together with their sister in England, so we know a lot of how they lived their lives. The Duke here was absolutely besotted with his wife, and they had something like 24 children. Unfortunately, Lady Louisa had none at all. I think they actually adopted one of the Kildare's children. But it's rather sweet when this gentleman was staying away at Rostellan, overlooking Cork Harbour. He wrote to his wife, "The house is very large and old. I have a very good bedchamber and a large, good new bed, where I should be happy if I had my dearest Emily. For I find already I cannot be happy without her. Company, fine weather, prospect, good house and bed is nothing without my dear little wife is with me and enjoys it also. Moving inside the house, this is a Chinese bedroom at Carton, which was decorated in 1759 under the Countess of Kildare's direction. The mantelpiece here might be by John Houghton, who I mentioned earlier, the Irish Chippendale, and John Kelly. They were responsible for carving the coat of arms in the pediment outside, so it's likely that they carved this chimney piece here. And in the drawings belonging to the family, this design here for a Rococo overmantel was discovered. In 1759, the Countess was begging her husband, "My dear Lord Kildare, don't let Louisa forget the India paper," that's her sister, "and if you see any you like, buy it at once, for that I have will never hold out for more than 3 rooms. And you know we have 4 to do, for I have set my heart upon that which opens into the garden being done, for it is certainly now our best and only good living room." And this is the room here she's describing. You can actually see the Chinese wallpaper which she put onto the wall. We have a very vivid description of this room written by a Member of Parliament, Thomas Creevey, in 1828. "What a difference it makes when one has a room to write in, with all one's little comforts about one. I never, to my mind, had one so made for me as my present one. It is a fat, lofty, square, moderate-sized room on the ground floor, French to the backbone in its furniture, gilt on the roof, gilded looking-glasses in all directions, fancy landscapes, and figures in panels, a capital canopy bed, furniture, white ground with bouquets of roses of all colours, and the bouquets as large as a small hat, armchairs ditto, chests of drawers, 2 quite new and might be from Paris, my own escritoire in a recess with paper lighters before me of all colours, and in another corner of the room another recess that shall be nameless through a door, quite belonging to itself and to no other apartment. The whole to conclude with a charming fire which woke me by its crackling nearly an hour ago, whilst my maid thought, of course, she was making it without waking the gentleman." Russborough, in County Wicklow, was the seat of the brewer, the first Earl of Milltown. The Countess of Kildare paid a visit in 1759, and she wrote down, "The house is really fine, and the furniture magnificent, but a frightful place." This last remark was obviously directed at the first Earl rather than the house, for she was scandalised by the fact that he was entertaining at the time of her visit a notorious woman named Mrs. Oliver, and her 2 daughters, who were all ensconced there playing hostesses. The Countess adds, "I assure you, none of the stories that are told of her are at all exaggerated. She surpasses anything that can be imagined." There he is, on the left, the first Earl of Milltown, in all his glory, looking rather pompous with his furs, painted in Rome in 1744. And on the right is his son, the second Earl of Milltown, which was painted by Pompeo Bertoni, also in Rome, in 1751. This is one of a pair of mahogany side tables now in the National Gallery of Ireland, originally from Russborough, made around 1750, and they have grooves along the back edge. I don't know if you can see that there, for displaying silver, probably the high Rococo service that he commissioned from the London silversmith George Wicks. This heavy Baroque style with the carved frieze is often associated with Irish furniture. as well as the squared paw foot here. This overmantel was also supplied to the first Earl around 1750. And this, together with some mirrors, form the most important collection of frames in Ireland. They're now in the National Gallery of Ireland. They were for pictures and mirrors, and they show the influence of the great carver Matthias Locke. He published a book in 1744, which was called Six Sconces, and another book in 1752 called A New Book of Ornaments. And we now know that he actually spent time in Ireland. Sorry, Thomas Johnson, who was the English carver, spent time in Ireland. And it's possible that Johnson, on one of his stays in Ireland, was responsible for carving these wonderful frames. And here is another of those frames and a detail. The putty's head, which appears on here, there you can see it there, would have harmonized with the putty on the ceiling of the hall. And there you can see the hall with its magnificent plasterwork ceiling by the stucadors, the Lanfrancini brothers. On the left is a sofa supplied to the first Earl of Milltown for Russborough, and it was part of an extensive suite of seat furniture that comprised 10 armchairs, 2 sofas and a daybed. And you can see here some of the armchairs ranged around the outside of the hall. Moving up into the north of Ireland, into County Antrim. This is the 5th Earl and Countess of Antrim. The Earl is portrayed in his court dress, whereas his wife is rather charmingly portrayed as a shepherdess, with her little lambs there. And this is their home, Glenarm Castle in County Antrim, having undergone a Victorian makeover in the 19th century. All of these crenellations added on in the 19th century. And this is their son, the 6th Earl of Antrim, in his volunteer uniform by an artist called Wilson of Belfast. And this is a mahogany serving table, probably one of my favourite pieces of Irish furniture, in the hall, and it would have been supplied to the 5th Earl and Countess in around 1750 for Glenarm. Their other house, Ballymagary, had actually burnt down, so it's likely that they were commissioning new furniture following that fire. Here is a detail of the table. The Roman dramatist Terence said, this is in Latin, "Sine Baccho et cerere frigit Venus." The literal translation is that love grows cold without the stimulus of wine and feasting. So here we have a Bacchic lion, and then you get festoons of fruit celebrating peace and plenty either side of the mask. And then originally there would have been a wine cistern under here brimming with bottles of wine. Again, you've got the Irish squared paw foot on the table and this trellis decoration here, which is an Irish feature. Oops, lost it. Go back. There we are. The lion mask was the subject of an enchanting memory by a daughter of the house, Lady Jane MacDonald, and she reminisces about her childhood at Glenarm in the 1860s. And she recalls that in the dining room, in the deep space between the double doors, was a sideboard. After kissing the head of the great carved animal on the huge mahogany sideboard, that animal and I shared a secret. He had a long, brown, shiny tongue hanging out, and I imagined it might be chocolate. So one day I gave it a surreptitious lick, and I remember now the horrid disappointment when I tasted the nasty salt of furniture polish. This is a portrait of the Dublin Bishop Robert Clayton and his wife Catherine, painted around 1740 by James Latham. And the reason I'm showing you this is because it shows two splat-back dining chairs. He's sitting on one, she's sitting on one, and there's Glenarm. There's still some very, very similar to that, probably from around 1730. They have this typically flattened H-shaped stretcher, which is common on Irish furniture. You don't see it on English furniture. And I expect some of you here will recognize it from American furniture. Also at Glenarm is this gilt gesso pier table of around 1740, probably made for the 5th Earl and his wife, the one in the shepherdess outfit. And this is what's known as a wake table. It was called a wake table because when the flaps are down, like they are here, the narrow part that's left exposed, this bit up here, is ideally sized to put a coffin on during a wake. And they're also known as hunt tables, as they were very easily stored at the side of the room, just as this is, with the flaps down, and then they would have been carried out during the hunt meet, and drinks and refreshments would have been put on them. And if you like the look of this table, there's actually one in the back room behind here that's for sale. Ladder-back chairs are particularly common in Ireland, and the lovely feature of the ones at Glenarm is that they've got these little piercings in them in each of the back. Also on this chair you can see a little block at the top of the leg to give it extra stability, and that again is an Irish feature that you don't see on English furniture. These hall chairs at Glenarm would have been made around 1780 for the 6th Earl. He was a gentleman in volunteer uniform, and we know that because the coat of arms still shows an Earl's coronet. He was later made Marquess of Antrim in 1789. This is Malahide Castle in County Dublin, and this is the Great Hall, one of the few surviving medieval great halls in Ireland. And this was the setting for the last breakfast of 14 members of the Catholic Talbot family, all of whom were slain at the Battle of the Boyne in 1690. You can see these chairs around the table here. There they are. They were sold by Christie's in 1976 to a well-known pop star, Mick Jagger. He now owns these, and a detail on the right of the this bit, that's the detail that's shown here. It has a little satire. The satires were the lecherous and lazy attendants of Bacchus. Another Irish feature is these little material carved tassels that go there, and then on the arm itself, the acanthus is carved all the way up the arm. On an English chair of the same period, it would probably have only come halfway up the arm. one of a set of 12 dining chairs from about 1760. English pattern books were clearly used by Irish cabinet makers because this chair-back pattern was taken from Thomas Chippendale's Gentleman and Cabinet Makers Director. It's a very popular chair-back pattern in Ireland. These chairs would have been supplied around 1760 to Richard Talbot, the then owner of the castle, who was remodelling his family seat in the 1760s. Again, you can see the little ear block at the top of the leg. And this is one of a pair of gilt gesso tables with lacquer tops. The lacquer would have been imported from China and put onto this Irish base. Has this very distinctive Bacchic lion mask holding swags of oak leaves. The oak leaves were sacred to the Roman god Jupiter. And the Bacchic mark and oak leaves are a recurrent feature on Irish furniture. Dublin newspapers of the period that this table was made, the 1740s, are full of japanners advertising their skills. Japanners painted in imitation of Chinese lacquer. Moving on to another castle. Birr Castle in County Offaly, the former stronghold of the O'Carroll family, was acquired by Sir Lawrence Parsons in 1612. He was Attorney General. And inside is this wonderful yew-wood staircase. As far back as 1681, the antiquary and topographer Thomas Dyneley entered in his journal, "Lord of this town is Sir Lawrence Parsons, where there is much plenty of yew timber. That of his house, the windows, staircases, window cases, tables, chairs, benches, and stools are formed therewith. Here is said to be the finest staircase in Ireland." Despite the castle being besieged by the Duke of Berwick's army in 1690, the staircase, as you can see, still survives. It's typical of the 1660s with this generous ramped handrail coming up here. And yew-wood, although uncommon, is often associated with Irish furniture, particularly in the 18th century. Just as a little aside, this image on the right forms a full page in our book, and we didn't realize until the book came out that on the staircase someone had actually dropped a packet of pills, which is only visible when the book was finally printed. This is a giltwood pier glass of around 1740, again supplied for Birr Castle. And you can see these unusual crescents flanking, hopefully you'll recognize it, the Irish flattened basket of flowers. Again, if you like the look of this, there's one similar, just a few feet behind me. And this cabinet on stand was made to incorporate this German ivory cabinet. So that they would have bought this ivory cabinet and then had this stand and frame around it made in the 1740s for Sir Lawrence Parsons. And there he is in the uniform of the Parsonstown Volunteers. And here is a serving table supplied around 1760. You can see, like the table at Newbridge, it has this carved Chinese ribbon fret frieze. And this pierced frieze is very common in Ireland. Another castle, Dublin Castle, which was the official residence of the Lord Lieutenant, who represented the monarch in Ireland. And here is a painting by William van der Hagen of a state ball in 1731. in the castle. This is one of the Lord Lieutenants who later became Prime Minister of Great Britain, William, 3rd Duke of Portland, and his brother Lord Edward Bentinck, painted by Benjamin West. There's the Duke. And this commode made of harewood, satinwood and marquetry was supplied to him in 1782 in the neoclassical style with this Roman medallion, more advertised in the Dublin Evening Post 1782 of his inlaid work, which included the manufacture of pier tables in the newest taste. He credited the perfection of his work to his long experience at Mayhew and Ince, London, and boasted of his remarkable fine coloured wood and elegant finished work. And finally, we move to another castle down in County Limerick, which I'm sure Desmond will expand on, the seat of the Knights of Glin, and you can see the Georgian house that was crenellated in the early 19th century. It's not only Desmond's home, it's an exclusive bed and breakfast. I'm sure you'd all be welcome. And on the right is a charming modern watercolour by Francis Farmer of Glin. I seem to remember I hand-carried this over from England. Here is Desmond and his wife and family. I think even the dog is in there. But the reason I'm showing you this is because this tower here is where we wrote Irish Furniture. And that window there was the desk at which we wrote the book. We weren't locked into the tower, but that is where we wrote it. The best collection of Irish furniture is at Glin, and this is the hall table with the Fitzmaurice arms. There's a lot of talk about how Irish furniture looks black. Well, we took a sample of the varnish and had it analysed, and there were actually 10 different layers on the table, 6 layers of varnish and 4 layers of wax. And of the 6 layers of varnish, the first 2 actually contained red and black particles. So it would have looked dark originally, but would have had a bit of a red tint. But the 3rd layer was 4 times thicker than all the others and was virtually black. And the reason it was so dark was that it had absorbed smoke particles. And you can imagine the fire, open fire, burning peat, all these smoke particles were absorbed by the table surface throughout the 19th century. And then that darkness has been sealed in by successive layers of wax. So the black look is very much part of Irish furniture. That's why it's sad when it's removed in the name of restoration. And that's another table in the hall with the arms of the Cray family. And we think that both of these tables were probably made in Cork or Limerick. There's a chair in the hall with a vase flat, and then this divided top rail, which appears to be peculiarly Irish. And then here you can see a detail of the underside of a stretcher. And for those of you who like turning chairs upside down, it has a little peg in here, which is peculiar to Ireland. In America, they cut off the end of the peg. Now you're experts in Irish furniture. And finally, a view of the library. I'm just whetting your appetites for a stay there. And a view of the hall. And you can see this Irish 18th century bureau cabinet there. There's a mirror by Booker and various other pieces of Irish furniture. And if you do stay there, all the guests are free to roam at random around these lovely rooms. And finally, That is the front cover of our book, which we'd be most happy to sign if you'd like to buy a copy afterwards. Thank you very much.
As usual, I spend my entire life losing things. I probably put them in my pocket. I can't read this, but I've lost my glasses. However,
Desmond's advert in the papers.
it's the advert in the papers of when they actually started the organisation. And that's the beginning of our tale. It was a recreation of an earlier organisation of 25 years previously in the early 1900s. This book, or series of books, was recording the remains of Georgian Dublin, which, of course, by the early 1900s was becoming a town, a ghost town, really. The great houses of nobility all deserted by their nobles, and mostly slums. I found my glasses. They seem to appear from my pocket, which I suppose is quite a sensible place to put one's glasses. So that set of 5 volumes was not an organisation that tried to save anything. It was a recording one. The first organisation of the society, when I was a young student at Harvard University, was the recreation of the great folly at Castletown, which James showed you earlier on, which was perhaps one of the most extraordinary follies ever built in Europe. You can see the kind of state it was in those days, and now it has been restored, and it was an eye-catcher at a vista at the end of the north side of Castletown, which of course is there. And you can see, if you have very sharp eyes, in the distance at the top, the Castletown folly itself at the end of the vista on the horizon. This was a most important time for the society because speculators had bought all the land around it, and no one took any interest in conservation of Georgian buildings. In fact, Georgian buildings and the work of the 18th century architects were considered colonial, they were considered alien, they were considered the houses of the discredited, hard-hated nobility. They were let to rot. May the crows rest in their rafters, was said frequently. And many of the houses all over Ireland had their roofs stripped off because then they didn't have to pay rates on them. So this gallant band of Desmond Riga Guinness and a few aficionados started to restore it after Desmond bought the property with 100 acres from the speculators. No one else was taking any interest in it at all. The lead was being stripped off the roof. A few more months it hadn't been occupied by this little band. All the chimney pieces had been stripped out and sold. So it was a memorable and very brave experience. A good bit of PR was when Jackie Kennedy arrived to look at the interiors of Castletown. Desmond, being a good public relations man, alerted every single member of the press, and there she is admiring the facade and the interiors. But it wasn't only Castletown that we worked at. These are a number of other houses. Ledwithstown on the left, the Damer House, and on the bottom right-hand side, Doneraile Court, and Roundwood, County Laois. These were all projects that we restored. And on the left, the amazing Hindu lodge at Dromana, and the Swiss cottage in the style of Nash, in the Trianon manner, really, of Marie Antoinette, at Kerr, County Tipperary. There are some of us all working away. That's Professor Kevin Nolan, that's Mariga herself, and a jolly band of distinguished types on the right-hand screen. But the biggest excitement was when the Electricity Supply Board in Dublin decided they were going to reconstitute one of the major streets of Dublin, Merrion Street, which you see here. And there it was being pulled down, and there is what is there today. So this actually annoyed and infuriated many people because it was a piece of crass and insensitive reorganization of one of our major streetscapes. We lost the case. We got Sir John Summerson. We got Sir Albert Richardson to support us. The great architectural Sir John Summerson, however, who was a Chile architectural director of the Soane Museum in London, was only really interested in recording houses, and if they disappeared, he couldn't give a damn. And he said there were only one damn house after another. So we didn't think much of his attitude. Sadly, that is what is there today. There is Mariga in front of a newspaper cutting. There is the Tailors Hall, another one of our great early restoration fights, which we won. There it is today, now the head of the Irish National Trust, Dan Tashka. And here we are today, conservation and grants. We've given grants towards that great, beautiful greenhouse at Ballyfin. All the windows, they're proper astragals, or what you might call window bars, have been put back into hamwood. We've given grants towards such a thing as a lantern at Ennisco, which is a charming bed, breakfast and dinner establishment in County Mayo. This was a vandalised church in Drogheda, as you can see on the right. We give us our biggest grant, which is about £50,000 in those days, towards that. This is where the Prince Regent was meant to come to have dinner in a house called Annesbrook, not far from Slane, where Lady Cunningham, his mistress at the time, was staying. And the Gothic roof there was falling in. The squire who lived there had pretensions, of course, to entertain the Prince Regent and spent all his money putting on a portico onto what was rather a modest house, and, of course, adding this banqueting room. It rained that day, and the Prince Regent never came. But look at the chimney piece, which is still there with the children of the house, I think, rather amusingly standing in it. This was a house I went to years ago with the great savant Maurice Craig, who had written the most important book on Dublin, Dublin, A Social and Architectural History, published in the 50s. When I went there was a hobo living in the basement who had a gun, which he fired at us. And we then later discovered that the only way he kept warm was by stripping the beautiful interior panelling and making a fire for it. There it is, plasterwork in the hall, in the drawing room, and later we saved it anyway, and it's now been a major project of ours. But even more exciting for moving from the country to Dublin itself is this incredible Rococo staircase in Dominic Street, which was painted with a variety of perfectly hideous colours, and 2 or 3 years we have stripped every single bit of paint off it and returned it to its original grey-white. Fine Street, in dereliction on the left, now restored. And the grants itself, we've given grants to Kilshannig, a major Palladian house there on the screen, with also marvellous plasterwork by the Lafranchinis. And the wings had domes on them. And the enterprising owner, Mr. Merry, with little help from ourselves, in many cases our grants originally only seed money, but they do encourage people to do things. He's put back the copper dome and restoring the cupola. There it is on the right. These are the grants we've done over the years, over £1 million or £2 million. And the last and most important enterprise we are at the moment, and in New York tomorrow night, will be our last big ball. We hope to raise about $100,000, $150,000 perhaps, towards the dining parlour or eating parlour at Hereford, County Meath, designed by Robert Adam. And here are a group of Americans who came last summer to see the work which is going on. You can see the intricate plaster decoration of which a great deal of archaeological work has gone on to bring back the original colours, original infill, etc. You can see the door and the greens and different colours already being done to put it back into its original shades. Buildings at risk. We did a very important seminar on that. We published the proceedings of it, and on the right, the Irish Country has a lovely film which was beautifully orchestrated with the mellifluous voice of great Angelica Houston. And one of the most important literary, one of our most important pamphlets was the restoration of the country house, which eventually led to the newly formed Irish Heritage Trust, whose first building, Fota, on the right-hand side, has now been taken over by them. Sadly, the Irish economy has had a major collapse, like everybody else, and we had a budget last week, and our 5 or 6 million per year has been scrapped to about half, which is a sad story, but we are still continuing on this restoration at Fota, just outside Cork. But it looks as if the other most important gardener house, which is another Cork house, which we were trying to take over, will have to wait till the recession passes. Other fights we've had was in the National Gallery. They were going to add this kind of tower onto it. We put up a balloon, which you can see on the left-hand screen. I think it would look very hard. And then we were able to keep the original Georgian house, and the National Gallery had to replan the whole of the wing of the National Gallery in order to keep this important Georgian house and interior, which has now been used as offices, etc. We were very unpopular with our trustees of the National Gallery in those days. Recently, the important series of facades on the Liffey of the Clarence Hotel, which is owned by the U2, started to have a plan by the great English architect Norman Foster, which you can see there, which is going to be an enormous sort of cap on this series of not particularly important houses, but they were listed, and a very important Art Deco hotel in the middle of it. We protested against that. It seems the power of music and the power of glamour of the U2 was against us, and it's been granted planning permission. Very unfortunate, to my mind. Our last little house, this pavilion in County Cork, which has a magnificent staircase, looks like that today, is in the hand of a developer who lives in San Diego, an Irish developer, I have to say. So we're fighting that battle at the moment. And of course, this is what the Irish, in some respects, I'm afraid to say, would rather see than little Vernon Mount's, which was the house I just showed you. This is the kind of new taste of Palladianism in Ireland. And old houses like that fall to bits, and a new and rather dull little box appears in the front. Or the park gates, which we admired perhaps in the 18th century, have rather more, how would you say, fashionably modern entrances. Or perhaps a bit of Charleston, a bit of Palladio, misconstrued, as you can see there, through the battlements. But in order to try to encourage the fact that there are great talents for rebuilding and restoration in Ireland, we have our building skills operation, which shows, as you see on the left-hand side, somebody, what is he doing? I can't quite see from here. What's it say? Well, he's making something of importance. There's thatching. At the bottom there, he's doing some other worthy cause for a building. Anyway, these building skills, we have a list of all the people who have the skills all over Ireland for making windows, do thatching, doing plaster work, doing woodwork, laying out this and that. And we have a list which, of course, anyone can apply to and they have to go through a very, very severe looking at, because we don't want to give the bad impression of bad skills, so that's very important as well. And every year we do this and look over these building skills to see that the people are doing the right thing, hoping that some of them will be used when they are restoring important buildings, perhaps rather than those rather delinquent villas you saw a few moments ago. Scholarship and publications. This is the really pride and joy of our work. We've had money from the Mellon Foundation and the Paul Getty Trust. This is the journal that discusses and publishes all the young and the older scholars in the field of architecture, decorative arts, painting in Ireland of the 18th, 19th and 20th century. We are not just a Georgian society. Our work leads us from the late 17th century right up to modernism. We never decided to change the name. We've often said we should change the name to the Georgian Society, but it's so well known now that we keep it as it is. These are some of the publications that have been put out by the Irish Georgian Society through the Churchill Press. A marvellous book of The Cries of Dublin, a book on the plasterwork of Dublin by the Stapletons and other neoclassical stucadors, and a catalogue of all the topographical works that I have in my own collection. And of course, wonder upon wonders, a couple of books there, one by a certain Knight of Glin with James Peill on the left, and a book on Irish painters has just come into a second edition now by my redoubtable colleague Anne Cruikshank, late of Trinity College. And all these are a list, don't bother reading them, of help and efforts we've made towards the publication of other people's books. And the scholarship with Desmond there on the right-hand side are given to young scholars, and many of those works are published in our great journal. That gives you the quarters of what we're up to. And at long last, we are now trying to get a proper headquarters in the middle of Dublin. And this is a section of a building that was the Civic Museum in Dublin, which was the Society of Artists building in the 18th century. And it has a great octagonal room in it where you would have lectures and exhibitions, etc. So we are at the moment, we have been at the moment asked by the Dublin Corporation with a grant to try to restore this building, and we hope to share it with the Irish Heritage Trust and ourselves. And this is what we're going to be trying to raise money for today and tomorrow. So in these difficult times, wish us good luck. Goodbye. There they are, some of the young Georgians, one or two other projects. There we are, Castletown, Doneraile, us having a jolly, and a new book on Irish houses coming out also this Christmas. Thank you. But to thank you, before I leave you, before you go clamouring downstairs to buy our book and drink a great deal of excellent white wine on the next floor, if people are interested in our work, if people are concerned with our work and want to go to Ireland and see what is going on there, because that is the only real way that we can orchestrate influence and interest, is if you come there. We can organise tours, we can facilitate visits to historic houses, parks and gardens. So the important thing is that Jim has pamphlets, which I'm afraid didn't arrive in time today, and he can sign you up, and perhaps we are able to have a new little cell here in Atlanta. We had a little cell here many years ago, which went the way of all flesh, disappeared, but now in this marvellous room, in this marvellous gallery, and with the exquisite series of important pieces of Georgian furniture, brought to America by Paul Johnson. It is, I hope, a beginning of a new idea of helping us in Ireland and encouraging you to come and see us in Ireland, and we can help you in every possible way. And possibly you might think of signing up to our organisation.